Hi, and welcome back to Making Space to Make. This is week 7, and today we're talking about multi-purpose spaces. Now, by this I mean sewing in dining rooms, bedrooms, shared offices, anywhere that needs to transform between functions. The reality of living in 2026 is that housing is so expensive across the US that it's amazing most of us have room to sew at all. A dedicated sewing room probably isn't a great use of space for a lot of people, and that's totally normal and also totally okay. You can absolutely have a functional and effective sewing setup in a room where there's also a pull-out couch for guests or an office that doubles as your creative space. And I mean, how cool is it that you have room to sew and do your hobbies no matter what it looks like? So today we're talking about making shared spaces work really well for sewing. As I keep repeating throughout this series, our hobby is making things, not creating magazine-ready spaces that we may or may not have room for. Let me start by sharing a bit about my experience with multi-purpose sewing rooms. I sewed in my apartment dining room when I was in college for fashion design. I kept my supplies in an original built-in cabinet in the Chicago 2 flat that I lived, and it was really not a great storage solution. Growing up, my mom sewed first in the dining room and then in a corner of her bedroom. She made it work really well, though, for years with smart systems. One thing I've noticed about shared spaces is that as they become more functional, you care less whether you have a dedicated sewing room. When your setup works well, you stop feeling like you're making do and start appreciating the flexibility. I really think we need to shift our mindset here. Like a guest room with a sewing setup, it's not a compromise, it's just a really smart use of space. Office and sewing combo is the same thing. They go hand in hand with the right storage. Don't let what you see on the internet make you feel bad about your space. The goal is function that works for your life, not perfection that works for photos. So now, how do we actually make these multi-purpose spaces work practically? I think that this is made a lot easier by having an easy to access, possibly portable system that contains what you need for most projects. My mom had this figured out with a large sewing box, kind of like a tackle box, that contained all the tools and notions she'd use every time she sewed. Things like bobbins, scissors, measuring tape, seam rippers, pins, needles, you get it, the essentials. She'd select fabric and thread on a per project basis. Some was bought for the project and some was kept in separate storage in her closet. But everything she needed every single time was in that box. This made setup and cleanup so much faster, which was really important to her sewing at home with 2 small children who really like to get into everything. It was me. What's important here is deciding what you need first and then finding the storage to fit those items. Storage should fit the items, not the other way around. That is a rule we're going to keep coming back to in this series. Think about what you use for every single project, or almost every project. Scissors, rotary cutter, blades, pins, things I mentioned before. These are all great candidates. I would personally avoid boxes without some sort of divider system inside. A large open box will just become a mess as everything kind of rolls around together. You want your tools to have specific homes, even within the portable system. You might want to consider keeping your thread and bobbins in a separate but also easy to access container. We all know how thread unravels all over the place, and before you know it, you've got nests of thread tying all your tools together. Here's a little benchmark that has served me well. If setup takes you more than about 15 minutes, your system might need work. Of course, this depends on how you sew. If you're a weekend marathon sewer, a longer setup might make sense. But if you sew in shorter bursts, you'll probably want to keep that setup time as low as possible. I want you to think back to week 1 and how you actually sew, and use that information to design a setup time that works for your habits. If you're spending more time setting up and putting away than actually sewing, that's a huge sign that your system is not working for you. Let me share what's worked well for me and what I would personally avoid. My favorite solutions are things where items are kept completely out of view, like smaller office-style drawer systems with drawers appropriately sized to the items going in them. I also love drawer dividers, to probably no one's surprise, to keep things in place and prevent them from rolling around the drawer. Sewing cabinets are fantastic for this purpose because they give you a dedicated space within a space that folds up relatively unobtrusively when not in use. We'll talk more about furniture options in week 8, but I just wanted to mention that here. Now, if you have room to put some sort of storage system in a closet, that also works well, especially for fabric or active projects. It's less ideal for smaller notions and tools that you'll need quick access to, though. What I have found really helps shared spaces work is having storage that kind of disappears when you're not sewing. Your dining room obviously needs to feel like a dining room when you're having dinner, not like a sewing room that happens to have a dining table in the middle of it. Now, this is where I think my mom's approach worked really well. When she was working in the dining room, she had her portable tool and notion box that she could easily bring in and out for work sessions. When she eventually moved her sewing into the bedroom, everything lived in a cabinet with doors. And when she wasn't sewing, you'd never know the dining room or bedroom doubled as her workspace. Ideally, you need 2 types of storage in a shared space, and that's portable for things you use every time that you're taking out, repetitively, and permanent, more hidden storage for everything else. The portable system travels around with you, especially if you're going to other rooms of the house, and everything else needs a permanent home that's completely out of view, like a closet, cabinet with doors, or even under bed storage. In a shared room, it's less important that everything is completely out of view, but it is important that it's easy to go between multiple functions of the room. Rolling carts are really popular, but from what I've seen of them in use, I just think they're kind of hard to organize effectively, and they can really easily collect stuff that shouldn't necessarily live there. They mostly have rounder edges that can make it difficult to use drawer dividers efficiently, and I think that drawer dividers are so important, again, for creating homes for everything. Plus, the fact that you can always see everything in them just visually bothers me. It just looks messy to me, but that's obviously a personal thing. I feel like for the footprint that they have, you could easily get something with more drawer options, a little more versatility. I also find that dresser drawers are pretty bad storage for almost everything except already made clothing and probably fabric. The compartments are too large and way too deep to store most smaller items neatly and efficiently, and they easily just become a jumbled mess of everything kind of tumbling around. When I had to use the built-in cabinet in my apartment, those drawers were a giant mess. It was bad. Bins can be helpful for things like fabric, but if you have to pull out a bunch of random bins just to get your tools ready to sew, it's probably not going to happen, and it becomes harder to put them away at the end of the day than just opening and closing an organized drawer or toolbox. Okay, so the reality of shared spaces is that you need to be able to flip between functions relatively quickly. Your sewing setup does need to disappear fast when your dining room becomes a dinner party venue. This is where the portable kit becomes essential. Everything you were actively using just goes back in the kit. Fabric and patterns go back in their designated hiding spot, and the space transforms back into its primary function. Something that is unique to shared spaces is that you may need to, for lack of a better word, protect your setup from other people who might also be using the space. Family members may need the dining room table for homework, or maybe you have roommates who may move your carefully piled piles. If you're mid-project and have to pack up quick, you might want to take a quick photo with your phone before you do. It's amazing how that little visual reminder will help you pick up where you left off. I learned this the hard way after spending about 20 or so minutes trying to remember how I had successfully arranged pattern pieces to fit on almost half the recommended fabric. It was a sad day. You also will need to communicate with the people that you share the space with. Let them know when you're in the middle of a project and need the space to stay in touch for a day or two. Likewise, you will need to be accommodating when they need to use the space. As long as it's not the only place to eat in the house, most people are happy to work around your schedule as long as they know what it is. Some weeks you'll need to completely put everything away between every session, and other times you might get to leave a project spread out for a few days. What matters is having systems that work in both scenarios, not just the ideal one, as unfortunately, reality is often far from ideal. This week, I want you to time yourself setting up for a sewing session. Don't change anything yet, just see how long it currently takes and notice where your friction points are. Think about what you use every single time you sew. Make a list of those essential tools and start thinking about how they could live together in an easy to access or portable system. If you're in a shared space, pay attention to how long cleanup takes as well. Both numbers will help you design a system that actually works for your sewing practice. Remember, if you're spending more time on setup and cleanup than sewing, then something needs to change. But also be realistic about your sewing style. Quick evening sewers need faster transitions than weekend marathoners. Your multi-purpose space can work beautifully for sewing, but the key is that you need to create systems that fit your life, not trying to force your life into someone else's system. Function over form always. Once your space becomes more functional, you'll stop caring about having a dedicated room and start appreciating the flexibility that you do have. I'll be sharing a blog post early next week about ideas for these types of portable storage systems. So after you've done your action step, take a look at that and get an idea of what might work for your setup and your tools. But make sure you don't buy anything until you know exactly what you need to put in it. Function first. Next week, we're diving into specific sewing room furniture and setup ideas. All those things you've been asking me about in the comments. So go take a peek at your tools, see what might make the cut into your portable or easy to access sewing kit, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.